Welcome to the Campaign Trend Podcast, where you're joining in on a conversation with the entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. I'm your host, Eric Wilson. I'm joined today by Julie Sweet. She is the Director of Advocacy and Industry Relations at the American Association of Political Consultants. We'll call it AAPC from here on out, where she runs point on data privacy, AI, and election-related policy. I've been working alongside Julie for probably at least a year, probably closer to 2 years now, including on the AAPC Foundation's Disclaimer Effect study, which is the first empirical research on how AI disclosures in political advertising actually affect voter trust. Today, we're digging into the AAPC's March 2026 member survey on AI adoption and political consulting, what the disclaimer effect findings mean for this patchwork of state disclosure laws we're living through, and the bigger question I keep coming back to, which is what does AI actually do to how campaigns are run, not just today, but as the technology keeps moving forward. So, Julie, the survey shows a little bit of growth here. 57% of AAPC members are now using AI every day. That's up from 34% just a year ago. But one thing that the data is careful to distinguish is the difference between AI as a chatbot, sort of a replacement for Google, and actually integrating it into how a firm operates. So walk us through what you're hearing from our members. Is this real adoption, or is it I asked ChatGPT to write me an email or a proposal adoption?
Yeah. And I think it's an important distinction. And if folks are interested in seeing the data, it's available for download on our website, the aapc.org/advocacy. Scroll down to our research section. I think what we broke up the survey question into kind of like 4 different patterns. So the first was, are you using it just as essentially kind of a search engine? And then the next couple of questions try to get at like, are you doing more than just kind of search engine, but you're using it for like document creation and integrating it into workflows? And then we asked about really, are you operationalizing with it? And then I think the last one was like, are you really pushing into kind of some of the agentic work? And what we're finding ultimately is that there is still a large group of folks that are kind of hanging out in the chatbot area. There's not that many. I think it's about 11% of firms that are starting to offer AI as a service. So these are folks that are essentially building AI first tools. And we can kind of talk about what that might look like as opposed to your basic kind of chat interface through ChatGPT or Gemini. And there is kind of a large and wide array adoption, but I think we're starting to see more and more people in that area of it's not just a search engine, but there is kind of an incorporation into how the firm operates and in the workflows. And I think this goes beyond just simple, are you automating? Which more and more firms are starting to do is, and we hear this, whether it's in panel discussions, is automating, if you have that regular kind of email cadence, or if you have a consistent workflow where you've got to process invoices, or you've got to log into an Excel spreadsheet just for purposes of tracking and things. And we're starting to see more of that, and then shifting into, okay, can I create a more complicated or comprehensive workflow where I start with, maybe I have an email that comes in from a client that says, or maybe it's even a RFP, and then you're able to kind of move into a workflow of what do we need to pull in for the RFP? What is the branding standards of the RFP? And then what are other information that you might pull in, all the way up to a completed RFP response or a proposal. And that whole workflow can now be automated within some of these tools.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate this about political consulting, but it is a lot. It's a portfolio strategy of managing risk, right? You're not going to be able to work with all the time winning campaigns. Some of your campaigns are going to lose. And so you want more campaigns, which is where I think AI is a really important lifeline for this industry because it allows you to kind of extend yourself and work on more campaigns. And so the survey found that only 13% of members are actively using agentic AI, and we define that as sort of tools that take actions, not just answer questions. But we see among those daily power users, that jumps up to 53%. And so we start to get this picture, right, of the profession is splitting into two tiers, where you've got people who are using AI, people who are not. What does that gap mean for how competitive this business looks in 2 to 4 years? Are you going to see kind of a consolidation around the people who figured it out, and then you're going to have these more boutique, which is kind of the situation that we have right now? Is it too late for someone to get caught up? What does that tell us?
I mean, people have been saying that broadcast is not king for a long time when we know that they still get a sizable percentage of the budget year after year, right? And so I wouldn't say like suddenly if you're not like 100% caught up on AI that that means you're not getting business in 2028. What I think it means is a couple of things, right? Is what we do I'm concerned about is that what we saw in the data is that the larger firms who have more staff and maybe a little bit more time, maybe they have like a CTO or they have developers on staff, are able to experiment more when it comes to agentic tools. Or maybe they have somebody that is able to do a bit more experimentation with AI-based software, right? And your smaller firms are not using enterprise level tools. They are perhaps still not even using a subscription based service. So they're even more hesitant to put any kind of information in there, right? And that this really, as you said, is kind of creating for the big firms, it's kind of a rocket ship. And if you're a smaller firm that is still not quite using the tools to your advantage, then it's going to really be hard to get off of the launching pad, right? And you're gonna miss out, I think, on an opportunity for your clients as well. Is that not only getting for your firm being able to go out there and get more clients and things like that, but there are so many opportunities to serve your client using the technology, in that you can, yes, create more content, you can better optimize, you can have more information about the volunteer base or about the donor base or even about the voters, and you can do a lot more in terms of just looking at, you don't need to have big huge contracts through firms that do all the social listening and all of those different parts, but you can just have Claude go and do a review of all the local newspapers that your clients may be in, the readers may be in their districts, right? And that information can get pulled in, and that's just added intelligence, not only for your client, but how you can better serve your client as well, right? And these are pretty basic to the user interface that you get with Claude or with ChatGPT. And so you're kind of making your job harder these days if you're not spending a little bit of time kind of experimenting with these tools, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably just a continuing of the evolution of where if you wanted to be a top tier political consultant that worked on top tier races, you needed to have an office in Old Town Alexandria, and you had to have a big staff, and they're getting disrupted by talented people with laptops, and I think that AI is only going to continue to do that. And so one of the things that was in the study was I think the breakdown was like one to five employees is kind of where most of the AAPC's members are in terms of firms, and these are the consultants who are working on those state ledge races, county commission campaigns. What did we find about AI adoption looks like for those groups? And are we seeing some people sort of take advantage of the ability to put a rocket ship on their business, like you alluded to?
I mean, I think we are, but again, we're seeing more of the agentic experimentation and stuff happen at the larger firms. But I want to make sure that folks realize and is that taking a step back is agentic AI at this point is not like going out there and setting up a whole bunch of autonomous agents that, through Claude or whatever you might be hearing out there in the ether. Like agentic AI is using cowork in Claude to say, hey, will you go out and check my email and tell me if there's anything urgent in there for me to do today, right? Or give me a rundown of all of the meetings that are on my Google or on my calendar this week, right? Or look in my email and tell me who, are there any RFPs that came in that I have not responded to yet that I should, right? This is agentic AI. It is not something very foreign. It is just asking the user interface, whether it's GPT, Gemini, or Claude. You can do this within Gemini in your Google Workspace. It's just, hey, go look at files that are on my computer or look at what's in my Google Workspace to tell me something about the things about my files or about my records or anything else. So like I don't want folks to get intimidated and say
Right.
like, oh, if I don't have like a fleet of autonomous agents running around, then I must be way behind the big guys. I don't think that's what it is. I think to a certain extent it's just a difference in language.
And for those listening, every time I talk with Julie, I feel behind on AI because you're really like making the most of it. And since the last time we chatted, I really caught up on some stuff. So I'm worried I'm going to be doing some catch up after this conversation. I want to switch now to the disclaimer effect study, which was really cool because we tricked voters into believing an ad. I'm sure the institutional review boards were not like that. But we applied the disclaimer saying that this was generated by AI to an ad that was a real person. We recorded it. It wasn't AI. And then we saw that just the presence of that disclaimer made them trust the ad less. And so a lot of people will sort of say, I guess at an abstract level, if an ad uses AI, it should have a disclaimer. But that key phrase, right, is the uses AI. And so what is the risk of just adding a disclaimer everywhere?
Yeah. Well, so backing up, what led to this study, so AAPC Foundation, which is a sister organization of the AAPC, conducted this study because coming out of the 2025 survey, the member survey on AI adoption that we did, keeping in mind, we're trying to do this longitudinally, right? So year after year, we want to try and understand
Which is
how
tough in an
use
industry where we're looking at 18 months at a time.
yeah. So coming out of the survey in 2025, there was a lot of folks, and I think that the feeling of folks was like, okay, we have this. If I use AI, I need to be transparent about it, and so we should just put a disclaimer just about on anything and everything if AI touches it. And it really got a number of folks thinking, including yourself, Eric, of like, well, but why, right? And I think that we wanted to understand like, okay, what is the role of the disclaimer? And we come from a culture of, oh, well, because we put the paid for by on everything, then it must be neutral, probably isn't going to be an issue, so it's fine to put a disclaimer on it. On top of that, we now have, I think my count is up to 30 states that have enacted laws that about AI generated or digitally altered media that could be considered deceptive. Now, that is very wildly differs from state to state to state. As I mentioned, it's 30 states. No two states are alike. And so it is a crazy patchwork that you all as consultants and anybody who is creating political content has to navigate here. But we really wanted to be like, okay, policymakers are making law, but what does the data actually say? And then we thought about, well, what is the role of the disclaimer? Is the disclaimer supposed to educate people and inform people? Is it like, and once they know it's AI, what are they supposed to do with that information? So there's just a lot of questions that we had about the role of the disclaimer. So we did the four different ads. One was created with AI, one was not created with AI. So we had a traditional ad and an AI shot ad, all identical. And what we found was when there was a disclaimer on the traditionally shot ad that said it was AI generated, trust and believability and credibility declined. And on the AI generated version of the ad, when they're same decline in trust and believability and credibility. And what we also found, because we did the RCT panels and we also did a dial test, is that there was almost the speed bump effect. So when the disclaimer was put onto the screen, folks like still paid attention, right? But they kind of were like not trusting at that point. So not only did we show that there was a decline in trust and believability when the disclaimer was on the screen at all times, but if we varied when the disclaimer came on, we could see that it was like at that point that the decline happened. And so that's pretty telling to us that you want to be discerning when applying it and really think to yourself, okay, that we want to ask that second question before I get there is
Right.
what is the purpose of the disclaimer, right? And the purpose of the disclaimer, we think, and I think you ask any legislator and they're like, oh, well, because the audience deserves to know and it helps inform them about the content and the veracity of the content. But what we found was that the less exposure and familiarity you have with the technology, and the less familiarity and exposure you have to like politics generally, the less meaningful and more confusing the disclaimer became. So the people that we are trying to probably be most helpful to, right, who are what we would consider to be most likely to be deceived by the technology, are the ones who are least helped by the existence of the disclaimer.
Yeah. You're listening to the Campaign Trend Podcast. I'm speaking with Julie Sweet from AAPC about the role of AI in our industry. And so we essentially, have a study that say these disclaimers don't work, really oversimplifying things. And so a skeptical person might ask, why do we listen to the fox's opinion about how the hen house is built? And so I'd love to hear your articulation of, well, what's our role in this policy conversation? And I think I would frame it like this, which is, we're not saying that we don't want any regulation. We just want regulation that is smart and knows the subject matter, which we happen to do, and so we're providing that insight.
Yeah, I think because what we don't want to happen is have folks say, because at the very beginning of all of this is using artificial intelligence to generate content is not in itself deceptive, right? Is that you can create tons of truthful content using artificial intelligence, and you can also use tons of deceptive content using not traditional ways of creating media, right? It is not it's not a sufficient condition for just being deceptive. And there is a bunch of reasons why you might want to explore using AI to create content, aside from just speed and scale and everything else. But like, keep in mind, your politics and our political communication does not exist in a vacuum, right? It exists in a whole information ecosystem where people are consuming artificial content created with artificial intelligence all the time, all day, every day on their social media feeds and everything else. And so it's like I fear that there is this notion that we can kind of protect or insulate political communication, and then does it start looking different and feeling different and being less responsive because we've kind of walled it off in this protected space, and everybody is consuming information that looks and feels and moves and responds to them over here on the commercial side much differently, right? Because we're not just competing against, it's not just Republicans and Democrats competing against each other. It is politics and democracy and free speech is competing against everything else out there. labeled, right? And what these disclaimer requirements is that they only apply to political communication. Certainly, there's some name, image, and likeness, and there's some commercial applications, which is just about using somebody's likeness in a commercial setting, which can be fraudulent and everything else. And there's also non-consensual intimate imagery, which is a whole nother ball game. But for the most part, we are the only like vertical of communication that is required to carry this kind of disclaimer. So you can see a bunch of AI slop out there, and there is nobody telling you it's got to be AI labeled, right? So there's that piece of it. And I think too is that what we've already seen of the 30 states that now have these laws, 2 of those laws have already been enjoined by the courts, right? So there are legitimate First Amendment concerns associated with these deepfake laws and these disclaimer requirements, and that 2 courts have already found that these disclaimers are compelled speech. And so if these laws cannot withstand First Amendment scrutiny, like what is the alternative? Right. And so that's why we really think it's all that much more important that we have data backed answers to, okay, so what do we do? And where the AAPC has come is, and we're preparing to release our disclaimer framework, is essentially like the line is, if you are trying to create evidence that doesn't exist for something that you can't prove, that's a pretty good indication that it's deceptive, and don't do it, whether it has a disclaimer or doesn't, right? We as political consultants, for political professionals, have been navigating this line for many, 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 many years because Photoshop has been able to make very realistic content for a very long time, right? And so I think there's that piece of it. And then we also want to make sure that if you're putting a disclaimer on something, like make it meaningful, right? AI generated, all of this stuff that the laws are requiring at this point confuse people. They don't understand what it means. So if you're doing a dramatization, say this is a dramatization. If it's a reenactment, say this is a reenactment, because that's something that folks understand, and it's more clarifying that what they're seeing is not actual evidence or like video footage, but rather a reenactment or dramatization or an AI translation. And that's just a lot more meaningful and helpful to the audience, which I think is what these laws are trying to get after. They just, they didn't have evidence and data, and now we do.
Yeah, I think that's where I come down of, hey, and this is in the broader AI debate, is this is a technology like any other, and we're going to have to adapt to it, and we don't necessarily need new laws. It's already illegal to deceive people and lie and misrepresent and do voter suppression. So we don't need, this extra category of law. And the example I always go back to, you've heard me say this before, is, if you use spell check to, correct the script that you wrote in Word before you shoot it, is that using AI? Well, yes. But I mean, is that really what we need to do to protect voters? No. And so I'm curious if we just look at kind of where this industry is going, because we're in a profession and the technology is moving faster than any regulatory framework can keep up. I mean, that goes for every industry, not just political, even though we are being kind of targeted in a specific way. When we actually think about what campaign operations look like in 4 or 8 years hence, with agentic systems doing real work, not just assisting it, what are you imagining? What does that look like? One of the things that, I always go back to is we have to say, I'm so-and-so and I approve this message, or paid for and authorized by so-and-so. How can you do that if no one has ever seen that? So I'm curious let's assume that regulation starts to make sense quicker. What does this look like? Where's this going?
But I think that's why I'm just very I consider myself very privileged to be where I'm at this moment in time, because I think it is so um we are at a transformational moment. Not because now you can use it to make content really fast and at scale. I think that the information environment is going to shift dramatically, right? And I think that I'm not so worried about automation in the industry, because I think that it is an industry that is actually, while we're very risk averse, I think we are ahead. Even the Pew research from last quarter in trends in workplace AI use, I'm looking over at my
Yeah.
computer right now, is that only 34% of academics are frequent AI users. Government and public policy is only at 21%. Finance is maybe up at 40%. So I mean, from that, we're actually pretty far ahead the curve. Maybe, in professional services up there at 36, which is like your lawyers and whatnot. The only people who are really behind is the technology sector. So I think as our little sector of the world, I think we're kind of ahead. So I feel good about that. And I also want to tell everybody, you're not behind. It's all right. But and there's lots of opportunity to learn and just dive in and start with a couple of projects and
No one
like
knows
get
anything. Yeah.
afraid of it, right? Um, but because I think there's some really big shifts that are coming. And I think it starts with the conversations about GEO or AEO or whatever you want to call it, which is essentially like it is going to become the filter by which most people are exposed to the world now, right? Like the way that I work with Claude is like if I see a debate on Twitter, I go to Claude and say, "Hey, help me referee this," right? And at a certain point, like if it, I do think some of these systems are going to be like it'll filter your Twitter feed for you. It'll, if LinkedIn ever lifts its ban, it'll go through your LinkedIn feed and you will be able to say, I want to see this, I don't want to see this, right? Or if you only show me stuff that talks this way. And it's sure, maybe it's kind of a system. It feels a little bit more powerful to me because right now the algorithm shows us everything and I have no control over the algorithm, but maybe I have control over my own little Claude filter system, right? And does that mean that we're going to end up in a world where essentially we're using our agentic AI to figure out how to get through the agentic AI and it's going to be AI persuading AI? I mean, who knows, right?
And then we're just knocking
We're
on people's doors all over again, right?
right? And you're going to have to go real old school at that point. So, um, but I don't think you can really do a good job of like forecasting where this stuff is going unless you really get in and be a user and a consumer of the technology. And because that's when you start seeing like, oh, this is how I can use it. Oh, and if I'm using it this way, how are voters going to be using it? Um, One of the cool things that I'm following is a guy who built an agent. He's actually in the UK. This is the power of LinkedIn, but he's in the UK and he built an agent to raise money for him for a philanthropy that he works with, right? 100% agentic, raised him $3,200 in the course of like 3 or 4 weeks, and did it all transparently and told everybody I'm an AI. And now the AI has its own PR company and a bunch of other stuff, right? But like, imagine that at scale. So this is kind of where the world is going, and and at the rate of speed of which this stuff is happening, it's going to be quick. So it's a little bit just like jump in the waters warm, um, and just don't be afraid to kind of see where and open yourself up to the possibility that change is coming.
Yeah. All right. Well, a lot to ponder there. And I want to thank Julie for a great conversation. I'll do a quick plug for AAPC. If you are in this industry and not yet a member, go to the aapc.org and become a member because we're doing some really important work for this industry and a lot is changing. And Julie's right at the forefront of it. So thank you for all that you do. Include links to all of our research there in the show notes. And If this episode made you a little bit smarter, gave you something to think about, all that we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. You look smarter in the process, and more people learn about the show. So it's a win-win. Remember to subscribe to the Campaign Trend podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and you'll never miss an episode. Be sure and visit our website, campaigntrend.com. With that, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.